Well, glory be and mercy me, we've done it yet again. Here we are. We've made it. I'm going to warn you guys right now. I've been up for 24 hours. Got like a little blink out of maybe like a half hour somewhere along the way. I think what happened is I came across this goddamn video by this Tristan Hopper, or whatever his dumb stupid name is, where he's like jerking off about capitalism, telling a whole bunch of bullshit propaganda lies, trying to take credit for China's successes, being like, the communist nation of China pulled millions of people out of poverty because of capitalism. It's like the most embarrassing shit of life. And I saw that and I thought, okay, I'm going to make a video about that. And then I moved on with my day and just like did some normal stuff. Hey, pissed off, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. And then I'm like doing one of those things where I'm like lying in bed and all I can think about is that stupid video. All I can think about is that stupid video. And I had like this moment of just like, fine. And I like throw my covers off. And I go make the video. And I'm like so mad. I'm so fucking upset. Like it's so egregiously bullshit. Like, there is no lie these guys won't tell. There is no lie these guys won't tell. If they think you'll believe it, they'll say it. If they think you'll suck it in, they'll say it. And I think the most egregious thing about it was just like, and the most egregious thing about this whole new movement of like the Capitalist Manifesto and all this bullshit that we're seeing in post-media is that they refuse to actually define what capitalism is because they don't know what it is. Or, perhaps more accurately, if they actually did define what capitalism is, then it would become immediately obvious that their position is indefensible, right? That like, in the Tristan Hopper video, he was saying, oh, China opened up its markets to trade. That's capitalism. It's like, no, it isn't. Literally, slave societies had markets, bro. Like, a market is like an institution that it has existed in every structure of society. Markets are not capitalism. It's childish to try to make this claim that, oh, free market liberalization, that's capitalism. Like what? So I guess Ramses was a capitalist. Like I guess Queen Elizabeth was a capitalist, right? Like, well, I guess Queen Elizabeth is a capitalist, but like Augustus, Caesar, you know, like friggin' the Zulus, you know. So, fortunately, today is Fuck Around Friday. So, I am just gonna do what the fuck I'd like. Here we are in the city of Shanghai, wandering around. I have come to really love these videos, just because, like, first of all, the cities are cool looking. There's lots of cool stuff going on in these cities, right? Like, this here is Shanghai. You can see how modernized it is. You can see how, like, this is like walking through the streets of Toronto, right? Like, you can find stuff like this all throughout Toronto. And the thing I really love about it is you're like, when you're doing these kind of walks, you see the people, right? You see the people as they're walking around. You see them, they're just normal, everyday, regular people enjoying their lives, living their lives, not overtaken by like some odd like idea of like an oppressive Chinese government. Like, seems pretty normal, like seems pretty regular, right? Seems like everybody's pretty okay. Like, there are people trying to figure their shit out. Are they exactly like we are in terms of their governance? Obviously not. Like, obviously not. But like, are they this like oppressive, brainwashed people? Probably not. I mean, probably not. You know? It's very grounding, I feel. It's very grounding doing this kind of stuff. And like seeing like, yeah, here's a business. Like here's an enterprise. Here's a place, right? And like, we know for a fact that Western media is so full of shit when it comes to reporting on the East generally, right? Like, The brutal overt lie. Like what's the new brutal lie that they're telling about North Korea? They're saying that the North Koreans banned laughter for 10 days, right? That we're they are acknowledging or mourning rather the death of the previous leader, the current leader's father, right? Uh, it's the 10-year anniversary, and I almost guarantee that like the government said something like, "Please refrain from joyous celebrations during this period of mourning." Something completely fucking normal, and we take that and run with it, being like, the oppressive North Korean government bans laughter. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, it's so got like, and I can't. Can you imagine being a person who like believes that? Can you imagine being a person and actually being like, yeah, they banned laughter. Yeah, you can't laugh in North Korea or else they'll shoot you on sight, or some bullshit shit like this. It's like how they reported that, the Business Insider reported that, the North Korea sentenced the man to death for bringing a copy of the show Squid Game in. Yeah. Meanwhile, like, North Korea is like, Squid Game's awesome. We love Squid Game. What a great and interesting show. Like, it's literally like the statement from the North Korean government. Like so you're telling me the North Koreans are like, Squid Game, what a great show, but we'll shoot you if you bring copies in. Like, it doesn't make any sense, and it's so aggressively stupid. Like, and it's getting like so obvious. Like, it's getting so obvious. And I circle back around to the Capitalist Manifesto, and just like, they're so desperate. Like, they're so desperate to try to reclaim some kind of credibility, which they never really had in the first place. But they're so desperate to try to convince us that capitalism actually has value and is worth something. But they're embarrassing themselves. Like, they're embarrassing themselves with the effort of it. They're really showing how illiterate they are. They're really showing how psychopathic they are. They're really showing how stupid they are. Like, it's exactly the same thing as what the slavers did on the lead up to the Civil War. They wrote a series of essays that just basically laid the case for their destruction, right? Literally saying things like, black people are naturally inferior, God wants us to enslave black people, and in some cases literally like, black people are making a lot of money. No, I don't give a shit about your morals. We're starting to see that same kind of level. Funnily enough, though, I gotta really tell you, from what I've been seeing about the Capitalist Manifesto, the Southern slavers on the lead up to the Civil War were more honest. They were more honest than these guys who are writing the Capitalist Manifesto. These guys that are writing the Capitalist Manifesto, they can't even talk about the system as it is, right? They've got to invent some bullshit like, capitalists are geniuses who do all the work. Like, that kind of like absurdist narrative. Whereas like the slavers in Cotton is King they're like, yeah, we enslaved black people. Yeah. Like, that's the system, right? Black people do all the work. We don't do any of the work. It's great, right? Like, they're honest about it. Like, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Southern slavers had more morality and were more honest than these fucking capitalists, who literally can't even like, for real. They are outright saying things like, capitalism is what built Vietnam. Like, you guys know about the Vietnam War, right? Like, you know what happened in the Vietnam War, right? Like, you guys blew the place apart. No, you're just not going to talk about the Vietnam War that everybody is extremely familiar with. That's like a very mainstream war that everybody knows about. You're just going to sidestep that. Oh, okay. So, like, fuck them. Fuck them is what I say. Fuck them is what I say. Well, pissed off, it might just be you and me picking the number. We're 10 minutes in. Let's do it. Let's do it. I'm just gonna go with a 5. It was a false flag, was.
Here we go for today's number.
Here's today's number.
It's December 17, 2021.
I'm 5, you're 6.
10 balls.
I like it.
Each ball has a number.
Each ball has a number.
Numbers 1 through 10.
Harry, how you doing? Dan Box, you
Whirl
managed to
the
both pick
number.
8s. I love it. I hope it's an 8. I do. That'd be great.
Pick
Glad you guys
a
are here.
number.
Pick a number.
Today's number is 3.
Wah, 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 wah. Normally, I would play a song now, but I gotta be honest, guys. I'm very tired. So I'm just gonna, completely sidestep this shit. I hope you guys are doing well out there. Man, what a crazy time to be alive. What an odd and strange and unusual time to be alive. Just everything is getting to be as dumb as it possibly can. And you're starting to see the liberals are obviously starting to feel the heat, right? They're obviously starting to feel the heat. That it can't have been a small moment for them to not get their majority, right? It had to have caused some kind of internal consternation for them. It had to have been a concerning moment. There are lots of people within the liberal caucuses. There are lots of just regular voters, right? The people who are involving themselves in the Liberal Party who want to see things like a basic income. The basic income is a very popular idea within the Liberal Party. There's also lots of people who want to see actual climate action taking place. And it's getting to the point now where even the liberals have to start seeing that they're not doing anything, that everything is performative, right? And so this is throwing Justin Trudeau into a bit of a tizzy and is really ramping up the performance, right? So, for example, Trudeau signals to Rogers, Telus, Bell to use or lose spectrum rights, right? Another headline, Trudeau instructs ministers to create more inclusive, fair Canada in new mandate letters. There's these mandate letters that are circulating, right? Where they're talking, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is ordering his entire cabinet to keep their eye on the government's broader goals of creating a more inclusive and resilient country, even as the COVID-19 pandemic is again threatening to thwart their ambitions. Trudeau's new mandate letters to the 38 members of cabinet were published online today, and they show that ending the fight against COVID remains the top priority across government. But Trudeau said the pandemic cannot throw everything off course, and his letters highlight the need to fight the existential threat of climate change and ensure a future where Canadians have a real and fair chance at success. So literally, they're just writing notes to one another and circulating it, and this is news. And so essentially, they've just talked to the CBC, right, which is the state-run media, and they've said, hey, can you just report on this? Can you just be a stenographer for us and report on these letters that we just shuffle amongst one another and pretend as though that's actually something worthwhile? Yeah, can you just uncritically report on the idea that we're wagging our finger at Rogers, Telus, and Bell, that's considered action, that's a real thing. It's all performative bullshit. That's all these liberals will give you. That's all they can give you. They cannot actually do anything. They are not interested in doing anything, and it's becoming extremely obvious. If you are in the Liberal Party, if you are voting Liberal, you are at this point a total fucking dupe. A total dupe. You know the phrase, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, I ain't gonna get fooled again? Well, I hate to tell you guys, we're now getting into third time fool, 4-time fool, right? I completely understand why people voted for the Liberals the first time around. Makes sense. I sort of get why you would vote for him a second time. The only reason you'd vote for him a third time is just because you're baffled and confused and you don't know what's going on. If you're voting for this guy a fucking fourth time, there's something wrong with your goddamn brain. Like, you should not have responsibility for anything. You literally should relinquish responsibility of everything in your life, because you clearly cannot make intelligent decisions. Like, you simply cannot. These liberals have done literally fucking nothing. I'm sorry. Not literally fucking nothing. They did buy a pipeline. They increased fossil fuel subsidies and fossil fuel emissions. Don't forget about the tanking of the economy, according to the OECD. Right, Canada is going to be the dead last amongst the developed nations in terms of economic stability and growth going in for the next 3 decades, according to the OECD. So, like, yeah, these liberals doing a bang up job, doing abso-fucking-lutely nothing of importance whatsoever, right? Like, for real, like, these liberals are going to go down in history as one of the worst administrations. Like, they've accomplished nothing. All they've done is rudder up to the United States. Justin Trudeau just reads cue cards. That's his whole shtick, right? And now that their own caucuses are starting to give them the heat, like, hey, maybe we should do something about climate change. Hey, net zero by 2050 seems like a long fucking way away, right? Maybe we could do some serious things right now, right? So what's the serious thing that Justin Trudeau is doing? Oh, he's passing fucking little pieces of paper amongst the ministers and saying that that's newsworthy and worth our time. Like, this guy is a joke. This guy's a fucking joke. Like, literally a joke. Like, and especially when you compare him to his father, right? Like, I'm not above comparing him to his father, right? Like, his father gave us the Charter of Rights and Freedom. The universal healthcare system has the Liberal Party's fingerprints all over it. You can make the case that Tommy Douglas is the real thrust, the NDP were the real thrusting force behind that, but the Liberals capitulated. They put it all in, right? Like, you're not going to compare Trudeau's father to him. Like, he's not even a lightweight. Like, he's not even putting the gloves on. Like, he's not getting into the ring, right? Like, he's just a pretty boy with his dad's name that doesn't know anything. So he just reads cue cards from people. That's it. That's all he is. Like, he's the figurehead of a figurehead. It's brutal. It's brutal. Is there anyone that you think would be a viable replacement for Singh? I think there's lots of people within the party, honestly. Like, I think about on the last leadership convention they had, there was a lot of good candidates, honestly, and of course I'm blanking on all their names. I'm fucking tired, dude. I'm fucking tired. The trouble with Singh, like, Singh becomes the leader of the NDP because he has a very tightly well organized, highly motivated group, political faction, right? The Sikh community that is a very well organized and highly motivated group of people who, very impressive how they have taken over the NDP, right? Really, really shows you that, like, if you can create an organization and have, like, a community organization, you can achieve pretty strong, powerful things. And honestly, like, it's just so goddamn unfortunate that Canada is the white supremacist nation that it is. Because, like, if it honestly, like, if Singh was just, like, a white dude from Brampton, right, named Jason Singer, saying exactly the same words that Jagmeet Singh was saying, like, exactly the same, he would be a considerable threat. He'd be a considerable threat to Justin Trudeau. Yeah, I wonder if even Nikki Ashton would be better, right? Although I gotta tell you, like, the wokeism conservatives would immediately bounce off of her. Like, the beer drinkers, the buck of beer crowd would definitely bounce off Nikki Ashton. Like, they would for sure. oh shit, she's a woman with opinions, a backbone who stands up for herself. I can't have that, right? Can't have that. No, we need to have like dreamy eyes Trudeau, right? Like we need to have like uh, Daniel Blakey. I actually don't know who Daniel Blakey is. I mean, the reality is they're not going to go into a leadership convention, right? Like they're not doing a leadership convention because the last election was kind of a wash across the board, right? Like, and honestly, the NDP gained voters, right? And they were threatening to win seats. So, and I mean, you can create a narrative that says like, yeah, basically everybody dug their heels in and just kind of voted the way they did. Normally, the Liberals like gain what, like 3 seats or something like this. Like it's not a big gain by the Liberals, and the Liberals lose voters overall. So there's a pretty good argument to say that like Singh should let's have Singh take another swing at it, right? Let's see what happens. Like, will Canadians get desperate enough? Will they be able to put aside the like whole turban thing? I just find it so odd. Not odd. It's just very telling that we seem perfectly fine with voting for a guy who's like come out in blackface in front of us. He should have resigned over that. The fact that he didn't is pretty telling. Like literally every single story I've ever seen where someone has done blackface and it has come out to the public, they have resigned. Justin Trudeau is literally the first person I've ever seen who can come out in front of the nation wearing blackface and still maintain his position of authority as if he has authority. And it's very telling that we as a nation are just like, oh, who hasn't done a little bit of blackface in their life, right? Like we're quick to forgive, but like we have like a weird skepticism towards a dude who seems like his only effrontery to us is that he's wearing a turban, like for real, like. We are very stupid, voting for destruction. And of course, as this all rages around us, right, Ontario is now reporting 3,124 new COVID cases today. This actually means that the modeling data was completely accurate. That 3 days ago, the Ontario Minister of Science, I believe, we were at 1,500 cases, 1,400 cases, and they said that we are going to double our case numbers in 3 days. Sure enough, here we are, 3 days out. We've doubled our case numbers. And they said we're going to double our case numbers every 3 days. So in another 3 days, so Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So on Monday, we should be reporting 6,000 new cases. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. By Thursday, there should be 12,000 cases. Right? Like that's what the modeling data has told us. And the Ford administration is essentially doing nothing. Like it's not doing completely nothing, but like slashing gathering sizes, reducing indoor capacity limits as COVID-19 cases soar. So Ontario has announced new restrictions, including cutting gathering size and slashing capacity limits to 50% for most indoor settings, as COVID-19 cases soar in the province. Starting at 12 a.m. on Sunday, gathering sizes will drop from 25 to 10. Outdoor gathering limits will be lowered to 25. Literally performative. Just performative nonsense. Like it's not going to stop this thing. It's not going to get in the way of it. Like we know for a fact that this Omicron variant is as transmissible whether or not you have the vaccine or not. That the vaccine does help in terms of the likelihood of you getting really sick and the likelihood of you needing to be hospitalized. There's a pretty large diminishment, but in terms of spreading it around, the Omicron variant doesn't care at all. No CRB, go get your Omicron at work, happy holidays. Yeah, no dancing in clubs. No, it's yeah, additionally, bars, restaurants, strip clubs are ordered to close. I love this. Will be ordered to close at 11 p.m. because you can't get the virus in a club and restaurant before 11 p.m. That's just science, guys. That's just science, guys. Like, the virus only spreads after 11 p.m. And, like, we know this thing is airborne. Like, at first there was this, like, speculation that, like, it's droplets, right? Which is why, like, the normal mask was recommended. Now they're saying that the normal mask is just it's nothing, right? Because it's aerosoled, it's in the air. You see those people wearing, like, the shields, like the clear shield masks. Those are useless, right? Because it's aerosoled, it's in the air, right? Like, literally all it takes is one person who is just like an asymptomatic carrier coming in and breathing. That's it. Just coming into your establishment and breathing. And then literally everybody that comes through is likely going to get it. It's highly infectious. It's like 6-7 times more infectious. And we just seem like totally chill. We're just like, yeah, okay. Business as usual. Totally normal. So that means when you get on the TTC to go to work, right? All it takes is one person, and that person could be completely asymptomatic, right? Just being on the bus, breathing, not even like coughing, not even being like, just breathing. Just breathing normally, right? It's aerosoled, it's in the air. And our government is doing literally fuck all about it. Like, literally fuck all. Like, this is what they're doing. It's a joke. It's just like the liberals. It is performative. It's performative nonsense, is what it is. I am to a point myself on the personal note. I am going to go to work tomorrow, but I'm going to have a pretty frank conversation with my manager and be like, probably not gonna participate in this anymore, bud. Probably not. Like, why? So that I can get this thing, right? So that we can spread it around, like. And no one is talking about the reality that, like, hey, do you know when this virus mutates? When is the moment that the virus mutates and has the opportunity to create new variants? Oh, when it's transmitted. So when it transmits from me to you and you to whoever, every time it does that, the virus has the opportunity to mutate. And so as we spread this thing around, which is clearly what we're doing, like, we're clearly doing that, it gives the opportunity for a new variant to appear. Like, we're a very, 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 very stupid people. Like, a very stupid people. Like, this is... And I mean, like, are we surprised? Like, Doug Ford's daughter is an anti-vaxxer, right? Like, Doug Ford's daughter is an anti-vaxxer. The learn to live with it doctrine. Yeah, that's what they're doing with school shootings, right? Just learn to live with it, right? Just learn to live with these unacceptable conditions, right? Is it any small wonder why there's the Great Resignation? Is there any small wonder why people are dropping out of participating in this crazed psychopathic society? Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure this shit out, guys. It doesn't take a genius to figure this shit out. Like, we are going to force you to work at jobs that do not pay the rent in the first place. Oh, and by the way, while you're there, you can catch a deadly virus that will kill people. Like, big yikes. Big yikes. And meanwhile, amidst this Omicron variant, which is spreading because of capitalism, the capitalists are printing the Capitalist Manifesto, extolling the virtues of the system that is literally destroying itself and the people, like literally, not abstractly or hyperbolically or metaphorically, literally. Yikes! 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 3 generations of Canadians, including Gen X, have been abandoned by government policy since the 80s. Looks like they're pushing for 5 generations. Well, I mean, for God's sakes, like, the capitalist system collapses itself, right? Like, we're witnessing it. That very much how, like, one of the great analogies for what must be done to capitalism comes from Lord of the Rings, right? Sauron's Ring of Power is capitalism. And Sam and Frodo's ascension to Mount Doom in order to cast the ring back into Mordor is the journey of small, non-politically affiliated people to seize power and use their power in order to destroy the capitalist system. But what is very prescient about Tolkien's writing is that he acknowledges that in the end, it isn't the people who ascended the mountain in order to throw the ring into Mount Doom who ultimately do it, right? Frodo becomes corrupted by the ring. He denies, he refuses to throw the ring into Mount Doom in the end. That's the corrupting force of capital. Who destroys the Ring of Power? Ultimately, it is the most loyal, the most twisted, and most corrupted figures by the ring, by the capitalist system, who, in their frantic desire to seize the power for themselves, will not only destroy the ring, capitalism, but themselves with it. I love that analogy, dude. It's such a good analogy. Also, I love talking about Lord of the Rings. Right? I love talking. Who doesn't love fucking Lord of the Rings? Go watch that trilogy again. It holds up, man. It holds up. They really did a good job. I could see. I understand why some people get really snooty about certain things. And everybody has their nitpicking complaint. Like, my nitpicking complaint about Lord of the Rings is that they never really established Gimli's power. You know? That, like, Gimli ends up being something of a kind of a comedy relief sort of figure. Although his friendship with Legolas is actually quite a beautiful story. And Legolas himself is a bit overwrought. Like, he's a bit overdone, if you ask me. Like, they really, really are just like, yeah, like, Orlando Bloom is hot. Let's get this guy doing crazy, nutty bullshit. And then have Gimli be like, that only counts as one, right? Like, let's go. Let's do it. But these are minor little nitpicks of overwhelmingly a story that's extremely well told. And the CGI stands up, like, everything works, right? Golem himself as a CGI figure really still works because he's supposed to be odd, he's supposed to have been twisted and distorted. And so the fact that the CGI looks a little a-kilter and is a little odd actually works in favor of the character, that you're supposed to be put off by him. That's the whole idea. And the orcs and the makeup and the whole thing, the fight scenes, right? Fucking You Shall Not Pass. Come on. Like, that shit's baller. Like, that shit's baller. Yeah. Go rewatch Lord of the Rings, and the entire time you're watching Lord of the Rings, understand that there, or at least try to put in your head the understanding that the the metaphorical story of the ring is that capitalism has made itself into the countryside, to the Shire, and that the people of the Shire are returning it back to its source in order to destroy it. And it makes for a very interesting story. It makes for a very, very interesting story. And you start to see, like, figures like, what's his name, Saruman? Like the wizard Saruman, right? Are there people like Saruman in the world today? People who have sold out their institutions, sold out themselves to this dark capitalist power? Yeah, I would say so. I think you could find analogies. Also, how Frodo never heals from the wound. He gets on the journey to destroy the ring and leaves the community, a form of PTSD, to be sure, to be sure. To be sure. I remember, like, there are people who, Saruman is a sockdem. Yeah. Well, and the message of environmental destruction, the story of the ants, right? And I remember people critiqued Lord of the Rings and Frodo. People would be like, what, it's just a ring, like Frodo, like, why he's being such a bitch about it? And I'm like, dude, like, did you not notice that, like, when they drop the ring, it doesn't, like, bounce the way a ring does? It, like, clonks onto the ground, and they make a point to show that, like, when the ring hits the ground, it just goes thump, like it's a heavy weight. Do you not notice that the chain that Frodo wears around his neck is actually beginning to, like, scar his neck? That it actually begins to, like, because it's digging into him, the weight of carrying the ring, right? Share the load. Yeah. And, like, and the narrative that exists between Frodo and Sam, that Frodo and Sam split, right, and separate, is like classic leftism, right? The left eats itself and fights against itself and splits itself apart. But the stalwart Samwise Gamgee continues on the path anyhow. Do you want to come up? Do you want to come up, buddy? Oh, do you want to come up? You want to come up? No, you just want pets. You just want pets. You're a good boy. Got this little dog down here just looking at me with his big, big black eyes. You're such a good little boy. Yes, you are. Precious little guy. Speaking of media, this is taking a bit of a left turn, but fuck it. It's Friday. It's fuck around Friday. I'm allowed to talk about what I want. And you know what? God damn it, it's my show. If you have Netflix or you're on Netflix, do yourself a real favor and invest some time in the show Arcane. I know that there's a lot of people who kind of are looking at that one sideways because it's based off of a video game franchise, right? League of Legends, no less. Like, and so people are a little bit like, video game, come on, this is going to be really, like, cheesy and dumb, right? Like all the fucking Marvel shit and all this kind of stuff. Like, I'm not going to bother. But what they have managed is and I'm not going to have any spoilers or anything, they have managed to tell a story of family and power and the inequalities that are built within systems of capital with clarity and precision. Like, one of the better stories and easily the best video game IP, like a video game to a television show or something that I have ever seen. Like, period. You want to come up now? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You're a good boy, buddy. You're a good boy. You're a good boy. That's right. Milo's just a little Wookiee. He's what would happen if a Wookiee and a Ewok had a baby. Little fuzzy Ewok. Yeah. From The Guardian. At 75, I still have to work. Millions of Americans can't afford to retire. Like, Maria Rios, 75, has worked as a food prep worker with contractor HMS Host at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport for 17 years, where she makes $14.50 an hour. Her husband, who is retired, only receives $400 a month in Social Security benefits. Rios would like to retire also, but she doesn't have the option, even as she is battling ovarian cancer. When COVID-19 hit the U.S., Rios was one of thousands of workers in the food service industry who were furloughed and was only recalled back to work a few months ago. While receiving unemployment assistance, Rios and her husband had to rely on food banks to have enough to eat. And because she lost her health insurance along with her job, she had to skip cancer treatments until she was able to get Medicare, but still paid hundreds of dollars out of pocket for treatment. Her situation means that at a time when many might assume she should be enjoying a well-earned rest, she is still forced to work. At 75 years old, I'm forced to still have to work to try to make ends meet. The health care the company provides is way too expensive, and they've yet to provide a more affordable health insurance plan, said Rios, who pays about $200 a month for her health insurance. It's also very important for people to be able to have a pension, too, to be able to retire with dignity, so people aren't forced to be in the position where I am right now, 75 years old, still having to work. She even recently went on strike with her co-workers for 10 days, fighting for higher wages, more affordable health care, and a pension. Media reports of older workers have often been framed as feel-good stories, such as a viral news report of an 89-year-old pizza delivery man who received a $12,000 tip raised by a customer out of remorse, as he works 30 hours a week because he can't afford to retire on Social Security benefits alone. Or an 84-year-old woman who started a new job at a motel housekeeper in Maine in July 2020. Or an 81-year-old woman in Ohio who volunteered to start working at her favorite restaurant in November 2021 because it shut down temporarily due to an inability to hire and retain enough staff. But the grim reality is millions of Americans are working into their senior years because they can't afford not to have a job. Over the next decade, the number of workers ages 75 and older is expected to increase in the U.S. by 96.5%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, with their labor force participation rate projected to rise from 8.9 in 2020 to 11.7 by 2030, a rate that has steadily increased from 4.7 in 1996. By 2040, the U.S. population of adults aged 65 and older is expected to increase to 80.8 million from 54.1 million in 2019. The number of workers who retired during the pandemic was about 2 million more than expected. 50.3% of U.S. adults aged 55 and older said that they were out of the labor force due to retirement in the third quarter of 2021. Compared to 48.1% in the third quarter of 2019, according to an analysis by the Pew Research Center. Though in recent months, the unretirement rate of U.S. workers has gradually increased towards pre-pandemic levels. As the aging U.S. population grows, participation in retirement plans has declined since 2000. Nearly half of all families in the U.S. have no retirement savings at all, and inequality among Americans based on retirement savings is greater than income inequality. Over 15 million adults aged 65 and older are economically insecure, with incomes below 200% of the federal poverty line, with Black, Hispanic, and women ages 65 and older more likely to live in poverty. I have no savings, no assets. I don't even own the home I've been renting for 15 years, says Dr. Lisa Nattel, 65, a chiropractor in Hawaii who put herself through school as a single mother. There's no way I could afford to retire. With the average estimated Social Security retirement benefit in 2021 at $1,543 a month, even with a 5.9% cost of living adjustment increased for 2022, millions of Americans who rely on Social Security benefits are forced to continue working past retirement age in order to make ends meet. Kathy Lube, a 69-year-old teacher in Cincinnati, Ohio, has continued working through the retirement age because Social Security benefits and her partial pension only provide $2,600 a month, which is not enough to cover her bills and student loan payments. I have to work just to keep paying my regular bills, says Lewis. Ted Newman of Columbus, Ohio, is a retired state government employee, but continued working full-time through his retirement, along with his wife, for the past 8 years. I have been working full-time for the last 8 years since retiring, and my wife also. Her yearly salary went almost completely to pay student debt, and I worked to have extras for the home, said Newman. When COVID-19 hit, his wife stopped working and he shifted to part-time due to health conditions. They paid about $1,000 towards Parent Plus loans for their daughter's tuition for years, but still owe the principal of the loan. Now our income is cut in half, and our loans will be coming due again in 2022, added Newman. I can't live long enough to pay the debt and plan to let it go to default because I can't afford to pay it anymore. As the U.S. population ages, with millions of Americans having no retirement savings, the number of older Americans with student debt, either for themselves or for children, is on the rise. Nearly 9 million Americans ages 50 and older still have student debt, and the amount owed by this demographic is growing faster than any other age group. In 2015, 40,000 Americans had their Social Security retirement benefits garnished for student loans. Jane Swichenko, 63, of Massachusetts, and her 68-year-old husband cannot afford to retire, in part because of Parent Plus student loans they took out for their children to attend college. My husband and I must work until we die. Parent Plus loans take over $1,000 a month, every month, for a decade now, and we continue to see a rising balance, said Swichenko. Not only can we not retire, we cannot afford to fix our old house. We are desperate for new windows, have a leaking chimney, and need a new electrical work done. She added, we work hard. We are frugal, but we're getting up there and have nothing to look forward to because of these loans. We have 5 grandchildren and don't know what we'll be able to buy for Christmas. This article was written with the support of a journalism fellowship from the Gerontological Society of America, the Journalists Network on Generations, and the RRF Foundation for Aging. Okay, buddy, down you go. Down you go. Like, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that we are being abandoned. That abandonment is the word. Total student debt in Canada is at least 18 billion, a paltry, pathetically small number. Such a tiny, insignificant number that we could eradicate student debt permanently, eliminate it as an organizational factor. And we won't. And we don't. Like, this system is completely shameless, psychotic. None of these people, no one should still have to work in their old age. No 75-year-old should be forced into a position where they have to work. Fuck that. Fuck that. Any system that is forcing this upon its citizens is an illegitimate system whose laws you don't need to follow. Period. Period. Every so often I encounter someone who thinks that I call this a capitalist death cult as clickbait. That I'm just trying to get people to click on it and pay attention. I'm dead serious. I'm deadly serious. This is a capitalist death cult. They will squeeze as much blood from the stone as they can, and they will squeeze so hard that the stone itself will shatter. The average student debtor owes at least $26,075. Well, and the idea that there's even interest on this is reprehensible. And at least here in Canada, you have the option of after 7 years, you can declare bankruptcy, right? Which I highly recommend. I highly recommend to everyone who's caught in this fraudulent system. Do that. I did that. I was forced into that position because of this completely fraudulent way. Like, there are poor nations that provide free university for people. We provide 12 years of schooling for free to people. Like, why is it suddenly if you want to become educated in a college or a university, you've got to take on the burden of this debt? And there's no the burden of guessing whether or not you'll be able to effectively sell yourself into the market, especially in such an unstable market as this, is completely on you. There's no amalgamation. There's no plan, right? Chaos brings order is the plan. And all of this chaos is just wasting the productivity and the potential of the citizenry. Like, we've recreated debtors' prisons just without the prisons. And we learned long ago, like, if you take people and you throw them into prison, well, they'll certainly never be able to pay the loan. Well, very similarly, if you burden people with a loan, charging them interest, ensuring that they'll never actually chew away at the principal of the loan, well, then they won't actually become a real productive member of the society in any meaningful way. Right? That's one of the many reasons why our economy is on the backslide. Because we refuse to acknowledge that people are the economy. If you don't have people, you don't have an economy. And if you have people and most of them are impoverished, then you've got a very sickly economy. Right? That you want people to have access to the markets that you're creating. You want them to have access. Like, you want to be able to actually distribute goods into the populace. And you can't do that if the only thing that the people can buy is rent. So literally, we are working our lives away so that we can pay for someone else's mortgage, while they do absolutely nothing whatsoever. No wonder the economy is in the shitter. No wonder the whole thing is in collapse. Like, and in the meantime, the capitalist class actually attempts to defend this monstrous system that forces our elderly to continue working into it as late as 80. Like, and to do what? The average time to pay off student loans in Canada is between 9 and 15 years. Yeah, this is why I tell people, just don't. Like, why bother building your credit score? You can't buy a house anyway. Like, why are you building this credit score? This credit score is worthless, right? It buys nothing. It provides nothing of value, right? You're not going to be able to start a business. What you're gonna compete against fucking Amazon? You're gonna compete against like Starbucks or A&W? Like, that's over. Monopoly capitalism is won. So what's the point of the credit system? It doesn't give you anything. You can't buy a house with it. Okay, I guess you can get a car, I suppose. Right? But you can't do anything meaningful with it anymore. So if the average time to pay off the loan is between 9 and 15 years, well, guess what? You can bankrupt out of it after 7. So do that instead. Don't waste your time. Don't even pay them. Give them nothing. Give them absolutely nothing. Like, just stop paying that shit. Like, it's theft as far as I'm concerned, right? Like, it should be $0. Exactly $0. No one should have to pay for even textbooks. Like, none of that. Fuck that shit. Fuck that noise completely. Like, the system is completely fraudulent. Unrepentantly so. Irredeemably so. It cannot be reformed. It must be replaced. Like, and stories like this that are coming out of The Guardian really show you why that's the case. While a group of psychopathic billionaires try to convince you with something they call the Capitalist Manifesto, where they refuse to actually be honest about what capitalism actually is and what it's actually doing in the world. I think it's the shamelessness that's so galling, right? Like, they're literally saying things like, oh, capitalism is the reason why this country we destroyed is doing so well. Like, they're actually saying that. They're saying that in regards to Vietnam, right? Like, we destroyed Vietnam, burned it down to rubble, bombed it so much that we ran out of bombs and ran out of targets to bomb. But the reason why they're doing so well is because of capitalism. I just can't think of a more incoherent, insane statement. Especially as Vietnam has been ruled by a communist party since the Vietnam War. Like, we're in a period of total manic insanity. Just like, it is a form of bigotry and racism to be unable to acknowledge the realities of our own actions in nations we destroy. Like, trying to claim success in India for capitalism when, like, British capitalism, like, do we remember who Gandhi was? Do you know who Gandhi was? Right? Go look up Gandhi and understand that Gandhi's primary antagonists were British industrial capitalists. Right? That the famines that existed throughout India, which we have pictures of, unlike the accusations they lay on the communists. This is my favorite, that the capitalists lay this accusation of famine on the communists and they don't have pictures of it. Right? They don't have eyewitness accounts, unless you really believe Nazis and Nazi propaganda. But they don't have, like, diplomats. They don't have boots on the ground. They've got nobody actually saying, yeah, there's, like, a famine here that, like, is a legitimate, serious crisis. Right? Such as in the Great Leap Forward from Mao. Like, they've got nothing. They've got literally nothing. We have actual pictures of the famines that the capitalists caused in India. We've got eyewitness accounts. We've got people giving testimony. We have evidence upon evidence upon evidence of the famines caused by the capitalist death cult. The idea that they are turning around and then saying of the countries they inflict this death upon, that their success is based on capitalism, is grotesque. Like, demonic. Completely demonic. And of course, like, the thing that really sets me off is that the people they're putting in front of us are the most weaselly looking, like, duplicitous looking losers you'll ever see. Like, from the start. Like, who is listening to these people and thinking, like, yeah, here's a trustworthy individual. Here's somebody who I really want to spend some time listening to. These gross, like, surrogate ghouls. Like, ugh. 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 touch of good news. Always good to report on some good news. Edmonton City Council approves an ongoing annual cut of 10 million. That's actually 10 billion. Is that 10 fucking billion? Am I dumb? I'm dumb. 10,943,000 to police services. Money will be held to address homelessness, community development, social services, and response programs. It isn't difficult to figure out that police services, the police budget is out of balance, right? No one is saying we should not have a police force. I shouldn't say no one is saying that, but the vast majority, that's why it's called defund the police and not abolish the police. Because the issue is the imbalance. That if you were to take the education budget and the transit budget and the fire department budget, right? And then the police budget, and you were to stack them all on top of each other, it would become very obvious that the structure you build would be unstable, simply because of the imbalance. And the Edmonton City Council looks like it's attempting to redress this, to rebalance the docket, to say, yeah, not every single thing should be responded to with a man with a gun on his hip, right? Not every problem can be solved like you're a sheriff in a cartoon cowboy movie, right? If we have free university, more people would be there because they wanted to at any age, having a highly educated population. But that's dangerous for the capitalist class, right? The capitalist class really thrives on illiteracy and stupidity, which you can see just by reading the Capitalist Manifesto. Like, the people who are writing in this Capitalist Manifesto are some of the most illiterate people I've ever seen in my life. Like, they don't know a single thing about what they're talking about. They don't even understand the base structure of what capitalism is. They don't understand what defines capitalism as capitalism, which is who owns the capital, right? Instead espousing moronic ideas that, market systems are capitalism, when literal, like, tribal societies had markets. Like, the defining characteristic of capital is that there's a small group of capitalists who own the capital. And we, the laborers, must sell ourselves to them in order to get access to food and shelter they withhold. If you are not talking about capital with that definition, you are illiterate. Like, and that's not even some Karl Marx shit. Like, that's Adam Smith, straight up. Go read Wealth of Nations. Like, he understood. He knew what the system was. He understood. Like, and it's this illiteracy that the capitalist death cult needs. It requires it. Because illiterate people who don't know anything about anything can be suckered into believing anything about anything, right? You can literally publish articles saying that North Korea bans laughter, and an illiterate group of boobs will just go along with that, not even thinking for a moment, like, that sounds unrealistic. Like, that sounds like not real, right? Because it isn't. Because it isn't. And this was the path that got me onto, like, I always believed that the 30 million famine deaths during China's Great Leap narrative, like, the number always seemed high, right? It always seemed aggressively high. And I always assumed that it was, like, probably skewed. And I've heard people, the capitalist death cult in the Capitalist Manifesto are saying as high as 80 million, which is absurd. The population at the time during the Great Leap Forward was 660 million people, right? 80 million people being taken out of a population of 660 million people. That would be like 5 times worse than the losses we've experienced over COVID. I'm going to read this out loud. This comes from a writer by the name of Utska Patniak. Right? He is a professor, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway. Revisiting alleged 30 million famine deaths during China's Great Leap. Oh, right at the bottom it says who he is. I'll read that first. Utsa Patniak is a Marxist economist in India. The article was first published in People's Democracy on the 26th of June, 2011. It's reproduced here for non-profit educational purposes. 30 years ago, a highly successful vilification campaign was launched against Mao Zedong, saying that a massive famine in which 27 to 30 million people died in China took place during the Great Leap period, 1958 to 1961, which marked the formation of the People's Communes under his leadership. The main basis of this assertion was, first, the population deficit in China during 1958 to 1961, and second, the work of 2 North American demographers, A.J. Cole and Judith Bannister. No one bothered to look at the highly dubious method through which these demographers had arrived at their apocalyptic figures. The estimate was later widely publicized by Amartya K. Sen, who built an entire theory saying that democratic freedom, especially press freedom in India, meant that famine was avoided, while its absence in China explains why the world did not know that such a massive famine had taken place until as much as a quarter century later, when the North American demographers painstakingly uncovered it. The capitalist press was happy to replicate the compliment by repeatedly writing of 30 million famine deaths, to the extent that a fiction was established as historical fact in the readers' minds. The London Economist had a special issue on China some years ago, which repeated the allegation of 30 million deaths in 3 separate articles and refused to publish the letter to the editor this author sent contradicting the claim. More recently, in his introduction to the book Mao Zedong on Practice and Contradiction, which he edited and published in 2006, Slavoj Žižek also mentioned the figure of 30 million as though it were a given fact. Well-known intellectuals have to be taken seriously and the claim examined. There are 2 routes through which very large famine deaths have been claimed. Firstly, population deficit, and secondly, inputting births and deaths which did not actually take place. Looking at China's official population data from its 1953 and 1964 censuses, we see that if the rate of population increase up to 1958 had been maintained, the population should have been 27 million higher over the period of 1956 to 1961 than it actually was. The population deficit is also discussed by the demographers Pravin Visaria and Leela Visaria. The population deficit was widely equated with famine deaths. But 18 million of the people alleged to have died in a famine were not born in the first place. The decline in the birth rate from 29 in 1958 to 18 in 1961 is being counted as famine deaths. The Chinese are a highly talented people, but they have not learnt the art of dying without being born. There's a basic responsibility that everyone, and more particularly academics, has to be clear and precise about. To say or write that 27 million people died in the famine in China conveys to the reader that people who were actually present and alive starved to death. But this did not actually happen, and the statement that it did is false. China had lowered its death rate sharply from 20 to 12 per thousand between 1953 and 1958. India did not reach the latter level until over a quarter century later. After the radical land reform and the formation of rural cooperatives, there were mass campaigns to clean up the environment and do away with disease-bearing pests, while a basic rural healthcare system was put in place. That a dramatic reduction in the rural death rate was achieved is not disputed by anyone. During the early commune formation from 1958, there was a massive mobilization of peasants for a stupendous construction effort, which completely altered, for a few years, the normal patterns of peasant family life. Women were drawn into the workforce, communal kitchens were established, and children looked after creches, as most of the able-bodied population moved to irrigation and other work sites during the slack season. We find a graphic description of this period of mass mobilization in William Hinton's Sheffen. When this author spent 3 weeks in China in 1983, visiting several communes, which still existed at that time, she was told every time that we built our water conservation system during the Great Leap. The birth rate fall from 1959 had to do with labor mobilization, and not low nutrition, since the 1958 food grain output was exceptionally good at 200 million tons. There was excess mortality compared to the 1958 level over the next 3 years, of a much smaller order. Let us be clear on the basic facts about what did happen. There was a run of 3 years of bad harvests in China. Drought in some parts, floods in others, and pest attacks. Food grain output fell from the 1958 good harvest of 20 million tons to 170 million tons in 1959, and further to 143.5 million tons in 1960, with 1961 registering a small recovery to 147 million tons. This was a 1/3 decline, larger than the 1/4 declines India saw during its mid-1960s drought and food crisis. Grain output drop coincided in time and with the formation of the communes, and this lent itself to a fallacious causal link being argued by the academics who were inclined to do so, and they blamed the commune formation for the output decline. One can much more plausibly argue precisely the opposite, that without the egalitarian distribution that the communes practiced, the impact on the people of the output decline, which arose for independent reasons and would have taken place anyway, would have been far worse. Further, without the 46,000 reservoirs built with collective labor on the communes up to 1980, the effects of later droughts would have been very severe. Recovery to the 200 million ton level took place only by 1965. Throughout, however, the per capita food grain output in China, even during the worst year, 1960, remained substantially above that in India. As output declined from 1959, there was a rise in the officially measured death rate from 12 in 1958 to 14.6 in 1959, followed by a sharp rise in 1960 to 25.4 per thousand, falling the next year to 14.2 and further to 10 in 1962. While clearly 1960 was an abnormal year, with about 8 million deaths in excess to the 1958 level, note that this peak official famine death rate of 25.4 per thousand in China was a little different from India's 24.8 death rate in the same year, which was considered quite normal and attracted no criticism. If we take the remarkably low death rate of 12 per thousand that China had achieved by 1958 as the benchmark, and calculate the deaths in excess over this period, 1959 to 1961, it totals 11.5 million. This is the maximal estimate of possible famine deaths. Even this order of excess deaths is puzzling, given the egalitarian distribution in China, since its average grain output per head was considerably above India's level, even in the worst year, and India saw no generalized famine in the mid-1960s. Relative to China's population, this figure of plausible excess mortality is low, and it did not satisfy the academics in northern universities who have always strongly opposed to socialized production. Cole and Bannister's estimates gave them the ammunition they were looking for to attack the communes. How exactly do Cole and Bannister reach a figure of famine deaths which is 3 times higher than the maximal plausible estimate? Examining carefully how they arrived at 30 million famine deaths estimate, we find that the figure was manufactured by using indefensible assumptions and has no scholarly basis. In the 1982 census, there was a survey on fertility covering 1 million persons, or a mere 0.1% sample of the population, who were asked about births and deaths from the early 1950s onwards. The very high total fertility rate obtained from this 1982 survey is used by them to say that millions more were actually born between the 2 census years, 1953 and 1964, than were officially recorded. They ignore the birth rate of 37 per thousand derived from a very much larger 1953 sample, which had covered 5% of all households and was specially designed to collect the information on births and deaths used in the official estimates. Instead, they input birth rates of 43 to 44 per thousand in the 1950s using the 1982 survey. There is no justification for such an arbitrary procedure of using a much later reported high fertility rate for a long distant past. We know that a distant recall period makes responses inaccurate. These inputted extra deaths between 1953 and 1964 total a massive 50 million, but according to them did not increase by an iota for the 1964 population total, 694.6 million. The official figure which they assume as correct. Thus, although all official birth and death rates are rejected by them, the official population totals are accepted. This opportunistic assumption is clearly necessary for their purpose, because it allows them to assert that the same number of extra people died between 1953 and 1964 as the extra people they claim were born. But the demographers are still not satisfied with the 50 million extra births and deaths that they have conjured up. Fitting a linear time trend to the falling death rate of the early 50s is done to say that the deaths should have continued to decline steeply after 1958, and since it did not, the difference from the trend meant additional famine deaths. Such straight-line trend fitting is a senseless procedure, since the death rate necessarily shows non-linear behavior. It cannot continue falling at the same steep rate. It has to flatten out, and cannot reach 0 in any population. Not even the inimitable Chinese people could hope to become immortal. The final estimate of extra deaths in both authors is raised thereby to a massive 60 million, a heroic 65% higher than the official total deaths over the intercensal period. Having created these 60 million extra deaths at their own sweet will out of nothing, the authors then proceed to allocate them over the years 1953 to 1964, arbitrarily attributing a higher portion to the great leap years in particular. The arbitrariness is clear from the variation in their own manipulations of the figures. Cole's allocation raises his peak death rate in 1960 to 38.8 per thousand, while Bannister is bolder and raises it to 44.6, compared to the official 25.4 for that year. And 30 million famine deaths are claimed over the great leap years after all this smart legerdemain. Having violated every tenet of reason, these academics may well have allocated all their imaginary deaths to the great leap years and then claimed that 60 million died. Why hang themselves only for a lamb rather than for a sheep? Seldom have we seen basic norms of academic probity and honesty being more blatantly violated than in this travesty of statistical estimates. And seldom have noted intellectuals, who might have been expected to show more common sense, shown instead more credulous naivety and irresponsibility, by accepting without investigation and propagating such nonsensical estimates, giving them the status of historical fact. In the process, they have libeled and continue to libel Mao Zedong, a great patriot and revolutionary. They have unwittingly confirmed the principle attributed to Goebbels, that a lie has to be a really big lie and be endlessly repeated. Then it is bound to be believed. 30 million or 3 crores is not a small figure. When 1 million people died in Britain's colony, Ireland, in 1846 to 47, the world knew about it. When 3 million people died in the 1943-44 Bengal famine, the fact that the famine occurred was known. Yet, 30 million people are supposed to have died in China without anyone knowing at the time that a famine took place. The reason no one knew about it is simple, for a massive famine did not take place at all. The intellectuals who quote the massive famine deaths figure of 30 million today are no doubt outstandingly clever in the small, im Kleinen, but are proving themselves to be rather foolish, im Grossen, in the large. A person has to be very foolhardy indeed to say that 30 million people died in a famine without anyone, including the foreign diplomats in China and the China watchers abroad, having the slightest inkling of it. And those who credulously believe this claim and uncritically repeat it show an even greater folly than the originators of the claim. Urtsa Patniak is a Marxist economist in India. This article was first published in People's Democracy on 26 June 2011. It is reproduced here for nonprofit educational purposes. And this final paragraph is really what actually hit me, because it's true. There isn't a single article written during the Great Leap Forward in any document, in any journal, that actually documents this famine. Meanwhile, and he's right to point out the potato famine. He's right to point out the Bengal famine. We knew about those events as they were occurring. We didn't go back 30 years after and create a narrative by looking at statistical data. We knew that those famines were occurring as they were occurring. Why is it that there is no diplomat? Why is it that there was no one at the time? Do the Chinese have superpowers? Is this what is to be believed? And when you go and you actually look at the propaganda surrounding it, like once you understand that it's propaganda, that it's just a brutal lie, yet another brutal lie put at our feet by the capitalist death cult, their propaganda sounds hysterical and childish. Imagine 30 million people dying in a region and no one talking about it. It's very much the same logic that they use for the Uyghur genocide. When we commit a genocide here in the West, we talk about it. The residential school system, the genocide of the First Nation people, the enslavement of the black population, these things were done openly because they had to be. Because to enslave a people and to commit a genocide of people is a great organizational project. It takes a lot of effort to do. And we have document after document showing that they openly discussed it in the halls of power and voted on it and agreed how to move forward as a people, organizationally organizing, how do you like that? Organizing this project of genocide. Nothing like that exists in China. There has been no document. There has been no one releasing anything showing any kind of conversation saying we should commit a genocide against the Uyghur people and the Uyghur population. And so what the argument is, the linchpin of the argument about the Uyghur genocide is that the Chinese people are enacting a genocide against millions of people without talking about it. how they have been given this massive superpower, this incredible ability to organize amongst themselves without communicating or talking about it in any meaningful way, has yet to be explained. And much in the same way, the supposed famine that occurs during Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, once again, so a famine of 30 million people happened and no one noticed. There is no documents. There are no people talking about it. There are no journalists. There are no photos. There's nobody went into, no journalist went into the region in order to capture it, in order to talk about it. No international viewer made note of it as it was occurring. The narrative of this 30 million people, 80 million people, as the Capitalist Manifesto reports, dying of a famine in the Great Leap Forward, it comes about 30 years after the fact by messing with statistical numbers in order to fabricate this story. I think we can say that very clearly. This outrageous lie, is yet another example to show you as cleanly as possible. There is no lie they will not tell. The capitalist death cult is psychotic. It is completely without morality. Everything that it talks about and communicates is opportunistic. If it creates an allegiance with you, it is an allegiance of convenience that it will break the moment it is convenient for them to break it. They don't understand what loyalty is. They don't understand or care about the truth. And they don't understand why it's important to hold on to the truth. This is the shit that I'm talking about. The deep, dark hole of the capitalist death cult. It's not hyperbolic to call it a death cult. Yet there is ample documentation of the literal starvation and genocide of the indigenous peoples of Canada continued to this day. Exactly. Or take the classic example of a genocide, right? The Hitler's concentration camps. Those were reported on as they were happening. We knew about them. We didn't discover them after the fact. They were reported on. You can find articles in the newspapers. Buried in page 58, subsection B, article 53, paragraph 62, right? But they were reported on. They were there. You can't find anything like that for this famine. And this author is correct to create an analogy between, or a comparison rather, between China and India during this period of time. That's a fairly fair comparison to make, and to show that these numbers are similar over this period of time. And there's no controversy. Nobody's talking about a horrific famine that occurred throughout India during this period of time, right? Some years more people die. It's just how it goes, right? It's just how it goes. Hey DJ, how you doing today, bud? Oof. I gotta tell you, I can tell that I'm low energy, but I still think I'm doing a pretty good job. I still think this is a pretty good cast. I hope you guys are doing great. I hope you're listening in. I hope you're learning something. I hope we're finding something out. Ontario PC Party and Ford Nation continue to exploit workers with wage slavery, forcing people to prostitute themselves off to entrepreneurs and businesses for incomes. They are not #working for workers. Yeah, they never were. Like, a really, truly eye-opening moment for me. Really, truly. An eye-opening moment for me was when we protested at Doug Ford's house. When we went and protested at Doug Ford's house, the people who came from the neighborhood in order to interact with us were the most reprehensible people I've ever seen in my life. Like, I've never met people worse than this. Literally, old men who attempted to destroy our sound equipment in front of police officers who didn't arrest them for doing so. Karens coming up and complaining that we were ruining their afternoon walk with our, poverty, which is directly tied to their voting patterns. Children pointing and laughing at the disabled while their parents smirk on. Like, the people who are voting conservative are disgusting people. Like, we are not going to change their minds. They are lost. Like, they are a lost people. The best that we can hope to do is galvanize more people in the populace in order to get behind anyone else. But it's looking more and more that Andrea Horvath is not up to the task. She's too weak. She doesn't really understand the electorate, nor does she understand the crisis that we actually are in. Like, standing up and saying that I'm going to raise the minimum wage to $20 per hour by 2026 doesn't cut it. Straight up doesn't cut it. Like, we are in a place now where we need actual leadership, where we need actual people who are actually going to be leaders, to actually care about the nation in serious ways, and I don't see anyone. I don't see anyone who's actually willing to seize the reins of this moment. And that seems to be structurally the way that it works. That if there was somebody who would stand up and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't abandon people to the streets the way we do, they'll simply be chased out of the political system. They won't get the support. They won't get the money. They won't get the ability. They won't get any attention. The media won't report on them. They won't be invited to debates. They'll be chased out of the system. Which is why ultimately the system is fraudulent and we don't need to abide by it or its laws. It's abandoned us already. Like, what's the crime? Abandoning it back? I don't think I see any logic in that. The only reason these systems exist is for the benefit of the populace. And if they are not facilitating that, then we don't need to pay attention to them. That we are in a position now where these incredulous, fraudulent liars are making it obvious that they are psychopaths who wish to enslave us until our old age, until the day we die. And all they've given us, the only path left for us, is to surround the halls of power and begin redrawing the Constitution directly in front of their faces. And declaring the Constitution that we redraw the true document that we will abide by. And we will ignore their documents. That's the only path left. To simply tell them to their faces, they have no authority or power here. we do not answer to them. Because they refuse to serve us. Which is the whole point. Let's take a little moment and listen to Mr. Kyle Kulinski. 182 DC politicians and staff caught insider trading.
Business Insider did a 5-month investigation into basically all of the DC politicians. And they found some incredible stuff. Credit to them for doing this hard work, because it really is hard work. Now, what they found is that a gigantic number of congresspeople are violating what's called the Stock Act. Now, what is the Stock Act? Well, it was passed in 2012. It was designed to combat insider trading among people in the Senate and people in the House of Representatives, elected officials. It was signed into law by Obama on April 4th, 2012. The law prohibits the use of non-public information for private profit, including insider trading by members of Congress and other government employees. It confirms changes to the Commodity Exchange Act, and it specifies reporting intervals for financial transactions. So, here's the gist of it. I'll give you a quote from it. A member, officer, or employee of the Senate shall not receive any compensation, nor shall he permit any compensation to accrue to his beneficial interest from any source, the receipt or accrual of which would occur by virtue of influence improperly exerted from his position as a member, officer, or employee. It's very clear. That's very clear. So in other words, look, you're allowed to own stocks, but it damn well better be something you have no legislative control over whatsoever. So that's the gist of it. And then if you do, you shouldn't, but if you do, you absolutely have to report it. That's the other aspect of it. Okay, so now let me show you the reality of the situation. In Business Insider, members of Congress with potential conflicts. So look at the bottom right there. The green are people who are solid. They're not in violation of the Stock Act. 214 Democrats not in violation of the Stock Act. 192 Republicans not in violation of the Stock Act. 1 independent not in violation of the Stock Act. Borderline cases. 50 Democrats, borderline in violation. 63 Republicans, borderline in violation. 1 independent, borderline in violation. Outright in violation. You have 5 Democrats, 8 Republicans, 0 independents. Now, let me just say real quick, the borderline cases I don't think are borderline based on my reading of the situation. I think that they're clearly in violation, or at the very least, the things they're doing are borderline illegal, but it definitely shouldn't be borderline. It 100% should be illegal. Okay.
That's mean to say, Just JC. Kuklinski. Come on. Why are you calling him Kuklinski? First of all, that's hilarious. Okay, that's a really, really, really funny. Is that in reference to when Bernie came on the show and didn't want Kyle Kulinski to interview him? He came on the show with what, Crystal Ball, and he only wanted to talk to Crystal Ball. He didn't want to talk to Kyle, which I think Kyle took pretty personally. I think he was pretty hurt by that, you know. Kuklinski. That's hilarious. All right, I'm going to keep playing this. I'm going to use Walker.
So, let me show you more. Here are the worst ones. These lawmakers have violated the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act of 2012 by failing to properly disclose financial trades, many to a significant degree. Some also employ senior staff members who violated the Stock Act or haven't themselves taken proactive steps to avoid potential conflicts of interest. So here, you see some of them. Lance Gooden, Dianne Feinstein, Tom Malinowski, Susie Lee, Chris Jacobs, Kevin Horn, Patrick Maloney, I think he's the head of the DCCC, Blake Moore, Kim Schreier, Senator Tommy Tuberville, Tom Suozzi. So these are the worst of the worst. Okay, now let me give you some more. 48 members of Congress and 182 senior-level congressional staffers who have violated a federal conflicts of interest law. So that's the total number. 182 senior level congressional staffers, and 48 members of Congress. Nearly 75 federal lawmakers held stocks in COVID-19 vaccine makers Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, or Pfizer in 2020, with many of them buying or selling these stocks in the early weeks of the pandemic. Clearly,
the thing that amazes me about a reporter like Kalinske is that he still manages to stay in this zone of like, can you believe it? You know? Like when he reports, it's always with this like, you'll never believe it. Look at this thing that they're doing this time. You'll never believe it. And every single time I get to be like, yeah, I believe it. Like, I believe it. Like, nothing's going to happen to these guys. Right? Nothing's going to happen to these guys. What do you think's going to happen to these guys? Does he think that reporting on this is going to suddenly be like, the FBI will come in and we'll have an actual kind of thing? Like, if there has ever been a lawless nation, it is America. Like, they don't have laws, right? Like, they have laws for the peasants, right? They'll throw a guy in prison for 20 years for stealing a Snickers bar or something, right? But if you steal like $15 million or like, you know, $1 billion through fraud or something, they don't give a fuck. Right? Especially if you're committing wage theft, right? Like, the punishment for getting caught committing wage theft is to pay the wages. That's it. So if you steal like $2 million worth of your employees' wages, and they file a lawsuit and go through the trouble and go through the hoops and finally get in front of a judge, and the judge actually says like, oh yeah, this is the case, you stole wages, well, then you've got to give them the $2 million, and that's the end of the story. You should always steal wages, like 100% of the time. You're completely incentivized to steal wages, right? It puts the onus completely on the wage slave to pursue legal action, and many of them will just abandon the cause, right? So it will always be a net gain for you. You will always be in a position where you will make money stealing wages. Always. Right? Because, like, even if your whole thing is like, oh, let's finally go to court and I'll just capitulate. That's what I would do. Like, if I was one of these billionaire guys, I would make it as policy. I would steal wages as often as possible in subtle ways. Like, I wouldn't steal like an entire person's paycheck, but I would definitely like steal wages as much as possible, skim off the top as much as possible. And if anybody stood up and even accused me, right, and started going to court over it, I literally would just be like, yeah, go to court. Like I would say as policy, go to court and just capitulate, declare, like, just be guilty. Don't draw it out, right? Just go to court, admit it. Move on, right? Don't, like, make them go through the hoops so they actually have to figure it out, right? File the paperwork, go through the time, have this burden in their life, right? But when we get to the point where we're there, just, like, admit it, pay them, leave, right? Don't fuck around. Just keep stealing wages. There's no reason not to. There's no crime, like, there's no jail time associated with it. There isn't even a fine associated with it. You should always steal people's wages. And most of the American system is structured this way. Where, like, so what? So what if you're caught insider trading? Like, the punishment is, like, likely a slap on the wrist. Right? Especially if you're, like, a congressperson. Like, you're not going to go to jail. Like, that's not real. Like, what are they going to do? They're going to fine you? Right? So even if they fine you the full value of your insider trading, you're still completely incentivized to do it, right? Because all you're risking is the amount of money you steal. Like, imagine if the crime of robbing a bank was to give the money back, and that was it. That was the only crime on the book. Rob a bank every single fucking day. Rob a bank every single fucking day. Like, always rob banks. Constantly. Why not? Why shouldn't you? The only punishment is that you give the money back. Like, that's it. So it's completely reasonable to believe that, like, you'll get away with it sometimes, right? So it'd be a very profitable venture for you, right? They're not going to arrest you, put you in prison. There's no jail time associated with this. It's just a civil suit. And they say, like, well, sir, you walked into a bank and you stole $1 million, so you got to give that $1 million back. Okay. Like, do it. Like, always do it. It's not even a crime if that's the case. And this is how most of the American legal system works. You might as well commit the crime, right? It's like how corporations will pollute rivers and lakes and all this kind of shit because, and they'll just pay the fine. They'll literally just be like, okay, we'll pay the fine, right? Because it's still the best route for them, right? That to take toxic waste and throw it into your lake is still makes them money, right? So they'll do it because there's no jail time associated with it. And this is why I say all of the like piecemeal reform bullshit that they are talking about in regards to the housing market is not going to work, right? Because if you put like a 1% tax, like what's the city council further support for increased housing supply and affordability through a vacant home tax. So the idea is that if you have a vacant home here in Toronto, the city council will make you pay 1% on it. Ooh. Do you genuinely think that's going to disincentivize this behavior? Do you genuinely think a 1% tax on literal billionaires, like, do you think they're going to notice it? No. Like, they don't care. Like, that's not going to suddenly make them be like, oh boy, I better find a bunch of renters. Like, I better lower my prices. Like, that's not what's going to happen. Like, we aren't taking these issues seriously at all. And it's getting serious. It's getting serious because Doug Ford is actually starting to talk about doing something serious. Yeah, Ontario to raise tax on foreign home buyers amid inaction from federal Liberals. Like, it's getting bad when a complete fraud like Doug Ford is actually going to pass legislation like this. That he is actually considering a 20% speculation tax. And which again, I think it's not going to do anything, right? Like, these people have $1 billion. Like, if Ontario, I genuinely, I believe that if they put like 100% tax on foreign home buyers, it wouldn't change a thing. It wouldn't change a thing. That would just become the new price. Because we don't respect or understand how much $1 billion actually is. And these guys have hundreds of billions of dollars at their disposal, right? That they're using the housing market as a way to launder money and as a way to store money, right? Because they have nothing else to buy, because the Canadian economy is the worst economy in the OECD nations, right? According to the new OECD report. And so if you're a Canadian billionaire, well, the best thing for you to do is to just take your money and shove it in the mattresses. And the billionaire version of that is buy up as much land as you can. Because land is always valuable. Like, you're always going to be able to leverage land. You're always going to be able to do something with land. Always. Right? It's always a good idea to have land. Like, always. It's immutable. It's never changing. And the conversation surrounding the housing crisis really shows you how far we have fallen. Like, we're not capable of actually, like, the solution is to say everyone gets a home before anyone gets a second home. That is the solution. And no one is actually, like, fuck this whole idea of a market. What are you even fucking talking about? Like, what are you even fucking talking about? Like, why is housing a market at all? Why, like, it's obviously, like, the whole capitalist riff that capitalism is the best way to distribute scarce resources. Well, the housing crisis shows that that's a lie. That it's a complete and total farce. Why? Because monopoly capitalists take over the market. And if you're not willing to actually acknowledge that, like these fucking cultists are not, then you can make whatever claim you want and pretend as though whatever action you're doing is actually going to have an impact when it isn't. Like, and what's annoying about the conversation in the housing market is that it's wasting everybody's time. And it's wasting people's time, and they don't know that it's being wasted. It's very similar to how the climate change conversation has gone. That when we voted in the Liberals, we expected some kind of action because they were the first party in Canada to actually acknowledge that climate change was a serious issue that needed to be focused on. They acknowledged that it was real, and they offered actual solutions, right? So they hoodwinked us. They bullshitted us. They lied to us. Very, very straightforwardly. Very straightforwardly. And the period of time that the Liberals have had power has been a complete and total waste of time. It has been lost time. That an actual political party that was serious about it, the first thing they would have done is defunded the fossil fuel industry. It's the first thing they would have done. And they would have said to it, like, well, too bad, get to it. And if that started to cause problems within our, like, food distribution network or anything like this, nationalize this bitch. Like, we had it, Trudeau Sr., Pierre Elliott Trudeau had the fossil fuel industry nationalized, right? It was a national, like, the idea that your natural resources are not somehow respondent to the will of the people through the power of the state is abhorrent. It's a complete and total aberration. What do you think is going to happen? Like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, imagine you had 10 people in a room and there was a machine that made food, and one person in the room was given the power to withhold food from other people or to distribute food how he saw fit. What do you think would happen? Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. You don't need to be a master storyteller. You don't need a doctorate in fucking social sciences, in anthropology or something, or economics to figure out what would happen if you gave someone such authority and power. Right? Someone's going to get fucked over. Someone's going to get exploited. That the person who has this power is going to use it for their own benefit in dark and sinister ways. For sure, without a doubt. Like, without a doubt. And this is essentially what we're doing when it comes to this conversation of the housing market. Which, again, the entire system is fraudulent. It doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. Yeah, don't get your hopes high on Leah Gazin's Bill C-22-3, Liberal MP Julie Griftowich. Along with their Liberal cohorts, will vote it down the same way the Liberals voted on the NDP's wealth tax bill. Yeah, make them do it. We know, like I always do. Like, I wasn't sitting here being like, Leah Gazin's bill, and then we'll all get a basic income. Like, that's not what's happening. Make them vote it down. Make them show their own party. Like, make the Liberals show their own supporters how fraudulent they are. That's where we're at in terms of this conversation, right? The basic income has supermajority popularity within the Liberal Party. As high as 90%, according to some polls, right? That people who vote Liberal are wildly in favor of a basic income. Wildly. It's not close. Like, for every 10 voters, 8 or 9 of them want the basic income in place. Right? And in many polls, it actually is the case that there's more support in the Liberal Party for a basic income than there is in the NDP, right? Like, people who are involved in UBI Works, people who are involved in Basic Income Canada, people who are involved in basic income groups and movements across Canada are Liberals. They vote Liberal. The people who come to their events are Liberals, right? Make them vote it down. Make them vote it down. Show these Liberal voters that their leadership is completely fraudulent, incapable of responding to the basic needs of the populace, incapable of it. Because the only way that the Liberal Party will actually begin to change its tune is if it has the existential threat of its elimination. That if we withhold our vote, that is the only way that they will actually respond to us. And here's a great tweet that kind of encapsulates what I'm talking about. This is from Jake Calafino. COVID has been the perfect illustration of how our government now works. In a crisis, it will provide benefits, but only the absolute minimum it determines necessary to protect the system from political upheaval. And then, as soon as stability is restored, it will take them away. That's the way it works. That's the grift. And so the goal now is to create a circumstance, a political circumstance, where the absolute minimum it determines necessary to protect the system from political upheaval is literally the handing over of the means of production and the incarceration of these climate change frauds. Like, we have to surround the halls of power. We have to create an existential threat for these people. And I do actually believe that the Liberal Party voters themselves are getting a little flabbergasted by these liberals. Like, flabbergasted is the word to use, right? Like, why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they doing it? And it is up to us and the artists and everyone to begin making it very clear that these liberals are fucking unacceptable and the people who are voting for them are an embarrassment. Like, stop fucking liberals. Stop having sex with liberals. Start spitting on liberals. Stop treating them like they're reasonable people, because they're not. They're supporting the absolute worst elements in the society. For God's sakes, the Liberal Party arm and train Nazis. Like, stop treating these, like, start treating conservatives with more respect. Start treating conservatives with more respect. And you'll see what happens in the Liberal Party. Right? Like, I think Aaron O'Toole would be a better prime minister. At least he's not lying to our face about what his intentions are. Right? In the last debate, Aaron O'Toole is very clear. People said to him, like, oh, your goal for Canada's climate targets are a bit low. And he's like, but we think that they're attainable. I would rather set a low bar we can cross than a high bar that we'll fail to meet. And I thought to myself, when he said that, I thought, oh, wow. Like, he's not lying. Like, he's not bullshitting us. Right? He's acknowledging that there's a crisis, and he's saying, and this is what we're willing to do. Right? I don't think it's acceptable. I'm not going to vote for him. Certainly. But that makes him better than Justin Trudeau, who just lies through his teeth. Like, Justin Trudeau has no intent. Like, the Liberals have no intention whatsoever of meeting any of these targets. 0%. 0%. They don't give a fuck. They don't care. All they care about is that you think that they are doing something about it. That's all they care about. Yep, I just look at both parties as two wings of the same colonial bird. Yep. So if that's the case, then start treating the Conservatives at least the same as the Liberals. Stop shitting on the Conservatives. Like, or if you do shit on the Conservatives, shit on the Conservatives and the Liberals in the same amount. Treat Liberals as Conservatives. Like, we have to get it through the heads of these fucking idiots voting conservative that what they're doing is duplicitous, that they are despicable people, right? And they are. Like, when I was growing up, there was always this sort of swirling question, because we heard the stories of the Nazis, right? And there was always this kind of swirling question that we would always speculate on in the schoolyard. Well, what would you do? What would you do if there were Nazis in your society taking over the society? Well, you know. You know exactly what you would be doing, right? Everybody in the society knows exactly what they would be doing, and the answer is that the majority of them would be voting for it. I was just talking to liberals in an open politics group, and they bend themselves into pretzels to defend the liberals. Yeah, well, denial is the first stage of grief. That's the only thing I have left to say to these guys. If you attempt to defend the liberals, I really do think the only thing left to say to these guys is denial is the first stage of grief. That you're going to get through denial, and then you're going to get through anger, and then bargaining, and then depression, and then finally acceptance. That you've been conned. Mark Twain had a beautiful phrase that he said, which is, it's harder to convince a man that he's been tricked than to trick the man. And part of that is because people simply do not want to admit that they are wrong. And if you're voting liberal, you're wrong. For sure. Like, as a guarantee. Like, do I need to make the case? They stand up in front of you and say that they're going to reduce emissions and then increase emissions. We are the worst polluter in the G7. We are, even the Americans have had a decline in their emissions compared to us. The OECD is now saying that we are the worst economy in the OECD nations. Any organization that we are a part of, we are the worst offender. The worst. The liberals have already come out and told us that they're not going to do anything about the housing crisis. Like, on what basis? By what logical argument do you have to offer your support to them? At this point, it is simply simping. It is simply simping. You know you're not going to get anything from them. You know they are going to abuse you and then abandon you. Like, it's like a weird kink at this point. It's a weird, freaky, odd little kink. Like you're a weird little troll person, like begging at the foot of a dominatrix who's whipping you. There's no other explanation anymore. Like, there's no rational reason to do it. There's no logic. There's no empathy. There's nothing there. What? They convince you because they wave a little pride flag and say she session? How stupid are you? I didn't realize that Canadians were so easily duped. Like the gullible rubes they obviously are. While the fucking liberals actively arm our traditional enemies, the Nazis. Like, shame. Shame. Don't debate liberals. Simply shit on them. They have no position that is worth listening to. They have no authority. They have no position that's worth a goddamn at all. Emissions have gone up. Inequality has gone up. The housing crisis is going on. We're the worst nation in the OECD. Our economy is in the shitter, and it's going to stay in the shitter. You're selling out the future of yourself and your own children for a fucking little flag that they wave in front of your face. It's fucking embarrassing. And the people who defend the liberals should be fucking embarrassed by it. And I'm done being nice to them. I'm done being nice to them. If you're going to stand in front of me and say that you vote liberal, I consider you as bad as a Nazi, if not worse, because the Nazis didn't attempt to destroy all human life. And incidentally, the Nazis were honest about what they wanted to do. They said, we're going to do a concentration camp and kill the Jews, and they did it. The liberals say, we're going to do something, and they don't. That makes them worse. Significantly worse. We should treat them that way. MacDonald's comments shocked his contemporaries in Parliament. He was the only member of the Canadian Parliament to use the term Aryan during the 1870s and 1880s, as well as the only member to argue that Asians and Europeans were separate species. Liberals told the House of Commons back in the 1880s that the Conservatives weren't starving Indigenous people enough. You need to starve them more if you want them to work. Abandon these people. Abandon them. Or at least stop pretending you give a fuck. At least stop pretending. Right? Do us the favor. Right? Stop pretending like you are a good person. Stop pretending like you have any moral position or you even care. Right? Stop pretending. Just say that you're voting for them so that they will fund Nazis. Just say that you're voting for them so that they will destroy the species. Just say it. Because that's what they're doing and they're going to continue doing it. There's no reason to believe they're going to stop. There's no reason to believe that anything is going to change if you continue voting for them. Stop. Either stop voting for them or stop pretending like you care. Just stop lying to us. Just grab hold of the death skull mask, the Skeletor mask, and put that shit on. That's what you guys are doing. Live it. Be the death cult that you know you want to be. Embrace the darkness. Let the hate flow through you. And we will rule the galaxy together as father and son. I'm sorry. I saw the Star Wars quote in front of me and I had to add a little levity to the conversation, for God's sakes. I'm always confused, man. I really gotta... I'm not confused, but I'm always impressed that there's always people here. How many of you are here right now? There's 8 of you here, right? Concurrent viewers, I can't see until the end. Oh, concurrent viewers. It's Friday, right? And you got to get down on Friday, so it's 9. Friday's always a low day. I've really begun debating whether or not I'm going to... I don't get days off anymore, right? I don't get days off anymore. I simply don't have a day where I'm not working any longer. And the only thing that's made that a bit tolerable is that this work I rather enjoy. I rather enjoy doing this kind of thing. What's going on over here, buddy? What's going on? But it does become a little wearing. And so I sort of think, I could take Fridays off. But at the same time, there's also this, I don't know, just treat Friday like a fuck around day, like I'm doing. Keep doing this. Yeah, thanks, Yetis. Thanks for your support, bud. Speaking of support, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Throw $1 my way in the Patreon. Always worth doing. Milo, what are you whining at me about? You got peanut butter here. What's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? There's magic everywhere. What's this? What's this? There's white stuff in the air. What's this? What's this? There's something in your eyes. Oh, thank you, Yetis. I appreciate that, bud. I really do. Today's an especially difficult day because the terror, just the terror, the realization that, it's going to come soon. We're already almost there. We're 85% of the way there. They will eventually simply rule openly as the psychopaths they are. They're almost already there. Just go type in the Capitalist Manifesto. Go to Google, The Capitalist Manifesto. Yeah, that'll give you the book. Yeah, hold on. Oh, there's a book. Wow, I should read that. It's probably going to be the most terrifying thing ever. But, like, National Post. Yeah, here you go. Oh, good. They're still printing more of this garbage. They're still printing more of this garbage, right? Go read these articles. Like, you're going to see the deepest, darkest psychopaths you've ever seen in your life. Just enormous liars. Like, and notice what they're doing, right? The 20th century's clash between free market liberalism, which is not capitalism. That's not what capitalism is. And so they're attempting to define capitalism as markets, which has nothing to do with what capitalism is. Again, even slave societies had fucking markets. Even kings and queens had markets. Like, what, you think when they were trading on the Silk Road, that wasn't a market system? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Right? They can't have an honest conversation about what capitalism is. They simply can't. Because if they were to have an honest conversation about what capitalism is, it would become very obvious very quickly that they are defending a wage slave system. And as long as they can convince gullible rubes, which is like 80% of the populace at this point, that capitalism means markets, when it explicitly does not, then they can continue to obfuscate the nature of the conversation. Like, here they've got a picture of Lenin, which I guarantee this is just going to be odious propaganda. I just watched your video. Good to see you, Nicholas. Hope you're here to contribute. I just watched your video on people living in poverty and commented on it. What I wanted to say is that we had added another 1 billion people to poverty since the 1960s. I mean, all of the poverty alleviation that's happening these days are happening in the communist nations, right? Like, and for very clear and obvious reasons. Like, the capitalists are not wrong when they say that market liberalization work, right? That's why people open themselves up to markets, right? That's why monarchies do it. That's why chieftains do it. That's why dictatorships do it. That's why slave societies do it. That's why the ancient Egyptians and the Romans and the Greeks did it. That's why the Mongols did it, right? Like, market liberalization works, right? It has nothing to do with capitalism. Capitalism is about who owns the capital, right? And if you liberalize your market, but then all of the benefits of that market liberalization goes into the hands of a small group of oligarchs who own all the capital, then it's not gonna fucking work. It's not gonna do anything. But good to see you, bud. Glad to see that you're here participating. Yep. Half the people in the world make less than $5.50 per day. Like, that's the global south, right? We're still recovering from, like, a mass, large-scale genocide and enslavement. Like, we're still recovering from it. And it takes generations. It takes generations. And not just, like, 1 or 2. It takes, like, 7 generations to get through this shit. They did, however, not account for inflation. Yeah. In the 60s, poverty line was at 1.6. Today it's 1.9. Should be at 7.4. Oy vey. I just moved the goalpost to less. They just moved the goalpost to less than $1.90 per day. Yep. That's part of it, right? Like, that's part of it. Just pretend as though, like, oh, we'll just move it down to this level, and sure, you can't get rent or you can't buy food with it, but, you know, we did it. Whereas when you take a look at China's poverty alleviation program, they went in the other direction, right? Instead of lowering the bar, they raised the bar. They said, like, okay, so we're actually lowering people in this bracket, but people still exist in this bracket, so we'll change the poverty line for the benefit of the people to make it more, and they're clearing that consistently. And then the capitalists turn around and take credit for it. And they're taking credit for it based on this idea that capitalism is markets, which means that they're either duplicitous or illiterate. It's probably both, frankly. It's probably both. It would be very difficult to be honest about a wage slave system that you are the primary beneficiary of, I think. Nobody wants to admit that they're the bad guy. Well, yeah, globally we're sinking into poverty. Yeah, because capitalism is like, inequality breeds poverty. It has to. It's logically not capable. It's logically not possible to have this degree of inequality without creating poverty. You have to. And you can see the increase in poverty in throughout the Western world, right? And the response throughout Europe has been to move to the left, right? You have the social democracies of like Scandinavia and Finland, but then you also have the rise of outright communist parties. Communist parties taking over in places like Germany, right? Communist parties taking over in places like Spain, right? Socialist parties beginning to grow and take over in France because they understand what's happening, right? Like, Europe was the continent that got completely fucked over by World War II, which fundamentally was a capitalist war. And the European nations, since World War II, have been in a constant conversation with one another about how do we avoid that catastrophe again? How do we avoid that catastrophe again? Not only did it cost us in lives, it cost us in structures, it cost us in time, it cost us in everything. It was meaningless. And what a lot of the... and it's led to a lot of socialization of governmental systems and ideas like the EU, right? The federation of these places. And the federating of their nations, which is very difficult for the Europeans to do. It's very difficult for the Europeans to federate, right? Given their long histories with one another, right? Their long histories of war and catastrophic war. The fact that they have even embarked on a federation plan at all is actually fairly remarkable. Like, the EU is a fairly remarkable attempt. You can see that it's not perfect, what with the UK bailing, right? And there are obvious exploitive aspects to the EU. Many of the EU power structures are non-democratic and are non-responsive to the people, right? Organizations like the IMF are like parasitic, right? But they're at least trying. And the reason why they're trying is because they want to avoid this catastrophe again. And when the Europeans see what's happening in America, they see what's happening. Like, they understand. And, like, the rise of Donald Trump was very scary for the Europeans. Very scary. And when Joe Biden comes back into power, he says America's back, and the Europeans say, for how long? And all it's going to take to get these Europeans to skitter away, all it's going to take is the rise of a fascist in America. If the Americans re-vote in Donald Trump, that would be good enough. But if they vote in, like, a Mike Pence level fascist, one of these deluded Christian fascists, like, America will isolate itself in large and significant ways, because it is highly unlikely that the Europeans are going to go along with an Adolf Hitler that they can see in front of their faces. It's highly unlikely. And the relationship between Europe and the United States is tenuous at best right now. Most of Europe, their primary trading partner right now is China. The exceptions are Germany and Italy. And probably something like Lithuania, like some of the real small ones, right? But like but like Germany and Italy do trade with China, right? Yep, Biden hasn't changed anything Trump is doing. That's exactly right. Good to see you, Isaac. Good to see you, Barnabas. Good to see you, Vince. Thanks for your love, bud. Thanks for your love. Yeah, sometimes the capitalism is too horrifying. It's too much. It's like dwelling on the essence of Cthulhu, right? Sleepless nights. And this Capitalist Manifesto trash, sometimes it really, really gets to me. It's just complete and total propaganda and garbage in intrinsic ways, like the mischaracterization of what capitalism actually is, which is pretty brilliantly done, honestly. Yeah, they're basically the same party. Well, they work for the same people, right? They work for the same people. It's just the classic, like, one is waving a pride flag, and it isn't to say that the Republicans are doing things that the Democrats don't want to do, right? Like, the Democrats are not in favor of abolishing, like, Roe v. Wade or diminishing voter rights or things like this, but they're not doing anything to stand up against it, right? Like, really the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that the Republicans want to be, like, true open psychopaths and want to, like, really spread as much suffering as they can openly, whereas the Democrats understand, much in the same way that the liberals do here in Canada, that it's more effective to be duplicitous. It's more effective to have a smiling face and appear friendly, appear accommodating, appear nice, right? It's more effective. That's how you gain someone's trust. And when you gain someone's trust, then you can profit from betraying them, right? Whereas, like, the Republicans are just fucking bulldozers, right? They're just bulldozers. So they're both tools. Like, one has a sinister smile and a poisoned dagger, and the other one carries around a fucking warhammer. Take your pick. Yep, Democrats dismantled the unions. Yeah, and they did it while saying that they were the pro-union party, right? That's the sneaky nature of how the Democrats operate. Very much like the liberals here in Canada. Very much the same sort of strategies and ideas. Ugh. Man, this total fucking psychotic bullshit. Canadians are carrying less debt? Probably not, bruh. Probably not. And if they are carrying less debt, it's probably because of, like, the CRB. Canadians have less debt pre-pandemic. Financial worries is rising inflation. Some people are chipping away their debt loads. With 68% carrying some sort of debt aside from a mortgage. An improvement from 73% earlier in the pandemic and 79% before its start. 1/3 report having not any debt at all. Well, and why do you think that happened? Like, why do you think that happened? Oh, was it because of the support systems that we erected? Like, the actual economy that we actually erected? Instead of this fucking fraudulent, ridiculous, sell yourself into a wage slave system? Like, listen to this delusional bullshit. But Manulife Bank contends there is hope for reaching financial goals, including achieving home ownership among rising prices. Lenny suggested people use flexible financial planning, whatever the fuck that is, when taking a good look at their finances. No matter what your situation is or the environment we operate in, people need to have a good understanding of where their money goes, how they can minimize their current spending, and how they can find ways to save more towards their goal. Like, the number one problem that is going on in the society today, if you ask me, is that our economists are not economists. That every single institution aligned itself among neoliberal principles, which are fraudulent. It's not an economic system. It's a religious ideology. And a religious ideology that is failing, as religious ideologies often do when ruddered up against reality. And the trouble is that all of our economists, all of them, see that there is a failure. Obviously there's a failure. Obviously. But because they have no actual training in actual economics, that their training is fraudulent, it's a religious ideology, they don't know what to do. And so they're just grasping at straws, pretending as though the words that are coming out of their mouths are meaningful, but it's all just dogmatic bullshit. Because they literally do not understand what to do. Because their entire ideology has failed and will continue to fail. It's an existential crisis of the highest order. We have been training our professionals incorrectly for 40 years. Really let that settle in. That the economics that we have been teaching from our institutions, from the University of Toronto to the Fraser Institute, has been a fraudulent religious ideology that has no basis in reality whatsoever. They can't fix the system even if they wanted to, because they don't have any idea what they're talking about, which bears out in these National Post articles where they are insisting that capitalism is markets. These people are clueless illiterates who have no idea what's happening around them. And they are held back by the fact that they think their education is worth anything at all. They are worse than illiterate. They are worse than illiterate. At least an illiterate person could be taught something from the position of their illiteracy. These people, these economists, these death cultists, which is what they are, these capitalist death cultists, will need to have what they believe, their religious ideology, purged from their brain before they can even be called illiterate. That is the depth of the crisis we are experiencing. That the so-called experts in our society in the field of economics are dogmatic religious death cultists who couldn't be explained what's going on if it stared them in the face, because reality contraveils their religious ideology that they insist has any validity in the conversation whatsoever. That's the terrifying truth, and why we are going to experience decades of downturn. You cannot run a country on fraudulent principles successfully. And their solutions are always things like austerity, which fail. We're going to grow the economy by cutting the economy. That's literally what austerity is. We're going to grow the economy by destroying the economy. The idea that destroying the public sector economy and attempting to empower the private sector economy will work is childish. It's a hysteria brought on by a death cult. And none of our leadership, when our leadership needs to speak to an economist, well, the only people who are actually around them are these neoliberal death cultists who don't understand the basics of what capitalism is, how it's structured, what it does, nor do they understand their own history. They don't understand the history of capitalism. They see the wealth that we exist in and they say, wow, capitalism has generated this wealth. And as long as you ignore the genocide of the First Nations people, as long as you ignore the constant invasions of the global South and the wealth extraction that occurred there, as well as the enslavement of the black population, as long as you ignore all of that and pay no attention to the basics of history, you can make this conclusion. Because you have a religious ideology on your hands. Like, we are going to experience a period of decline, a serious period of decline, that is going to be extremely isolating. And Canada can make the attempt to unhitch its wagon to America's star, but I fear the reality is that Canada and the United States are going to go down together. And what is coming from America's perspective is that they are going to, as they decline, they are going to attempt to reassert themselves in the global in the world. And the way that they assert themselves will be through military force. But because they're so fucking clueless, it will fail. It will be an embarrassing defeat after embarrassing defeat, as the Americans just blow up in their rage and anger that no one respects us anymore. Worse is, of course, that capitalism is killing the planet. Yeah, and at this point, we have less than 10 years to fix the cancerous shit that has been done for the past 150 years. Yeah. And we just have to stop. Like, it truly is not about fixing it. You understand? It's not about creating a technology. It's not about manufacturing something. It's not about becoming productive and doing a thing. It quite literally is about stopping. Simply stopping. That the capitalist death cult keeps trying to find ways to keep this mass hysteria going. To keep the constant, persistent pursuit of superpowers ceaselessly pounding. Just keep pounding that drum, and it's not going to work. And the pursuit of it will destroy us. That even the erection of the green energy required to replace the fossil fuels will produce enough pollution to destroy us in the first place. The solution is to stop. Very simply. if you were driving a knife through your arm, well, the first thing you would want to do if you wanted to get that knife out of your arm would be to stop pushing the knife into your arm. Right? If you were driving a car towards a wall, you wouldn't try to create some kind of idea of, okay, well, how can I continue to drive towards the wall without crashing into the wall? No. First thing you would do is you would stop the car. We have to stop. And the reality is, and this is where the capitalists get really uncomfortable, because they like to believe that they're the most powerful force in the universe in their psychopathic narcissism. But the true reality is that if we were to simply stop, we would bear witness to the earth healing itself. The sharpest emissions decline that has occurred over this period of time happened during the pandemic period, when we all locked down to the degree that we locked down. This place was a garden before we got here. The earth literally by itself, with no influence or input from us, created a perfect garden for us to thrive in. The idea that we are the ones that are responsible for healing this planet is a joke. The earth is quite capable of doing that itself. And all we have to do is humble ourselves before the might of the planet that created us in the first place, as well as the environment by which we could thrive in. And all we have to do is stop destroying it. And the best way to stop destroying it is to stop. Shut down these cryptocurrencies. Shut down these toys. Stop shooting rockets at space. Stop. Just stop. It is actually quite easy. But the reality is that we are caught in a mass hysteria. And this mass hysteria, the central goal of the mass hysteria is to imbue ourselves with superpowers. That quite literally, what we are doing is we are extracting the dead from the earth. We are exhuming their graves, creating dark elixirs, which we can then pour into infernal machines that we have forged from the metals of the earth to grant us abilities to fly, go great speeds, teleport our voices and images across great distances, create machines capable of giving us digital hallucinations, amusing ourselves with moronic Pokemon card trading digital programs, which essentially are what cryptocurrencies are. And the question is always, what's the next superpower? What's the next big thing? Well, I would argue that the next big thing should be put your toys away. Sit in the corner for a little while. Recognize that we are children. When compared to the power of an all-powerful and unforgiving universe. And if we continue to defy the rules that obviously exist in this universe, we will be wiped away and it won't even pause to consider it. We won't even stand as a lesson to future creatures. We will be wiped away. It will be as if we were never here. And if we want to avoid this predictable fate, all we have to do is stop. Capitalism is a dictatorship. Try exercising free speech at your job or in protest against corporations and see how fast you are shut down. Yeah. Every business is a totalitarian dictatorship. Every single business. Unless it's a cooperative, right? It's a totalitarian dictatorship. The inability of the capitalist class to acknowledge this is quite striking. Like, their inability to be honest and to actually talk about the nature of business, the nature of these hierarchies that they defend, is quite striking. Like, I think that's probably the most surprising part about the Capitalist Manifestos, is the height of their illiteracy. Their complete inability to understand basic history. Like basic. I'm talking like grade 9 level history. Like literally like, you are in Canada. Canada came over from Britain. Like really, 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 really basic shit. Yeah, and it's all about jobs, 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 because you gotta pound the pulpit on jobs, 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 because you've got to treat the wage slave system as a good, right? As the only way to distribute goods, which we know it's completely false. Like it's completely false. Like we are getting to a point now where we have the technology and we have the capability and we have the know-how. Look, we have created a machine that produces so much food, so much bounty, that we throw 50% of it away. It's crazed what we're doing. We could just as easily create a basic income, nationalize and subsidize the food industry, and give people free access to food and shelter. And that would be the basis of our economy. And people would be much more happy with it. People would be much, much happier with it. Homelessness would disappear. No one would be worried about food insecurity. These structures would be easy. This is what the capitalists are most terrified of, by the way. That people will begin to actually recognize and realize how easy it would be to disempower them. It would be very simple. It wouldn't be a big giant fight. You literally say all wealth over $10 million is taxed at 100%, and the capitalist class dies instantly. Instantly. It dies. And then from there, you create systems of nationalization. You create laws, which then the capitalists will call authoritarian. Because near as I can tell, having laws and following them is authoritarian. Which makes sense in a culture that insists chaos is order. Yeah, they don't care about throwing food away because they only need to sell 10% to make the money. Yeah. Well, and it just goes to show you, like, we could make food free. And we could actually connect people to the agricultural systems. Instead of having like 2% of the population doing all of the work in the agricultural sector, we could have 30, 40, 50% of the society and spread the labor out, right? Spread it throughout. But if you are like a white supremacist colonizer, it's all about domination and control. It's all about status and respect. And it's all about hunting for the next kill. I've worked on orchards and farms. That's 50% of food that makes it to market. Crops abandoned because it costs too much to pick and sort. Yeah. Well, and you've got absurdist things that happen. Like when I was in New Brunswick, the blueberry growers in New Brunswick had figured out a way using bees and bee pollination, like strategic placement of hives and direct bee pollination. They found out how to increase the yields of their crops by a factor of 10. 10 times the amount of blueberries. In any rational society, this would be considered a massive success, an enormous discovery. Using the same plot of land, with the same agricultural procedures, accepting the inclusion of beehives that are moved into the land, you can increase your crop yield by a factor of 10. Well, do you know what happened to these farmers? Well, just because you increase the amount of blueberries you have doesn't mean you increase the demand for blueberries. And so the price of blueberries bottomed out. The farmers made the same amount of money. They didn't gain anything from doing it. And I've even spoken to some farmers who said they consider it a net loss in the end. The system of capital fails. It is a failure. It simply doesn't work. It has only ever been good at destruction, death, theft, genocide, and slavery. These are the only things that capitalism has ever been good at. And as long as you ignore those, you can pretend like the outcomes of wealth generation are because capitalism is a system that fairly distributes goods. As long as you ignore basic history and observation, your eyes, you can make these sorts of absurdist claims. How you doing, Ezial? Good to see you, bud. Most people who talk about history whitewash and sanitize the atrocities and exploitations by colonialism. It's extremely hard for people who want to learn history to avoid. Yeah. Like, you really got to try. Like, to maintain this level of illiteracy on the subject, you've really got to work hard at it. You really got to work hard at it. It would actually be easier to simply accept the truth than to work as hard as they do to ignore it. Or fabricate it. Which is all they're doing. People in Guatemala that send the coffee to Starbucks cannot afford to drink a cup of coffee themselves, yeah. Well, and you end up with absurdist systems. Like, we give aid to Guatemala so that they can buy food for themselves while they export food to us. How about let the Guatemalans keep the food for themselves? No? Oh, interesting. Interesting arrangement we have here. And then you ask yourself, well, why do the Guatemalans agree to doing it? Well, because we literally send troops with guns in to blow them up if they don't comply. Like, this is the arrangement that these countries are under. Is it any small wonder that the nations of the world are turning to China as it opens up the Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road, as it shows the nations of the world the model for how to build your society? Right? The great success of China and why the capitalists are so desperate to claim that the success of China has been capitalism instead of communist and socialist ideals is because they know that China has showed the rest of the world how to build a stable economy and how to actually grow quickly, efficiently, and build. And it's going to become very obvious very shortly. Like, the changes that happen in Afghanistan are going to be dramatic. Like, in 5 years, it will be a new and different country. In 10 years, it will be a powerhouse in the region. It will be as if the Americans were never there. That is how quickly things will improve for the Afghani people. And once the Americans pull out of Iraq, this failed war effort, the same thing will happen in Iraq. What's the environmental impacts of shipping this food via big ships around when they could keep the food themselves? We could create skyscraper agricultural buildings in each community to grow whatever. Yeah. Well, and you have idiotic things happening, DJ. It's even worse than simply like grow the food and then send the food, right? You have incredibly idiotic situations where you have food that is grown in South America that is then transported over to an eastern nation like Indonesia, for example, to be packaged, to then be shipped back to North America for sale. Like, so it's not even as bad as, so it's even worse than the idea of like, let's just pick a random thing, then say like, Guyana. So Guyana wants to grow bananas, and then those bananas get shipped. We think, right? They get shipped up to Florida, right? So that's going to be fossil fuels. That's going to be dumping pollutants into the ocean. But that's not what happens, right? Guyana grows bananas, and then they ship those bananas over here, right, to Malaysia or Indonesia, where they're packaged. And then they get sent over to American ports. So it's actually far worse than you think. Far worse. And we just don't give a shit. Like, we just don't give a shit. Like, these guys do not care about their own children. Like, it's getting very, very obvious that that's the case. You could have packaging on the ships, and we could only really be shipping if that country is in need. Natural disaster, most people could create their own if given the proper resources. Yeah. Like, what, you think these countries aren't extremely wealthy? Michael Parenti said it best, right? These countries are rich. It's the people who are poor. Like, where do you think we got our wealth from? How do you think we did that? Capitalism is the American dream of the few. Well, and what's embarrassing, Isaac, about the whole thing is that the rich are miserable. Like, this is something like I read an article fairly recently on this channel that was from a therapist for wealthy people, like millionaires and billionaires, right? He's a therapist on the inner circle of the billionaire class. And he outright says, these guys are miserable. Like, they're having a bad time. They don't like what's going on in their own life. They feel adrift and meaningless. Because capitalists are adrift and meaningless. Their system of chaos has brought nothing but destruction. And their defenders are delusional, illiterate boobs. Like, obviously. And so even the people who you would consider the primary beneficiaries are miserable. Like, sure, you're going to find a couple of guys who are just like, fuck you, I got mine, whistle my way to the graveyard. But by and large, the system has failed even the rich. Like, many of these wealthy people, one of their major complaints is that they can't actually have friendships, right? That every relationship they have is tainted by the fact that they have this enormous wealth and power. They can never be certain that the people around them are there for the genuine reasons of the heart, friendship, kinship, family? Or are they just hanging around because you've got a lot of money? This instills in them a sense of paranoia. The system has failed even the beneficiary. It does not work. Oh, kind of want to end on something faffy. I mean, not surprisingly, right? This is from Dmitry Laskaris. I hope Dmitry Laskaris runs for the Green Party leadership again. I think he's got a good chance at it. A new Ledger poll, he was supposed to put in by whoever, but that's fine. But a new Ledger poll finds 31% of young Canadians have a positive view of socialism, while only 18% have a negative view. And only 17% have a positive view of capitalism, while 33% have a negative view. I wonder if I can get a better look at this. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Cooperative, right? Imagine hearing the word cooperative and thinking like 4% negative. So like there are sociopaths in the mix, right? Socialism, 31%. Neutral is 37%. Capitalism, 17% are positive. 38% neutral. Huge amounts of negative. And that's going to get more extreme. Conservatism is actually worse than capitalism. Conservatism, 16%. Baby boomers, 15% have a positive view, 24 negative, but more or less neutral, which I actually think is good. Like, that's nice. Like, that's nice. Like, just sort of a neutral kind of a thing, mainly. I mean, if I was the boomers, I would be upset by that, I think. But I think, honestly, I feel like if the baby boomer generation makes it out and people feel kind of neutral about them, that's probably for the best. Like, really think about this. Religion does better amongst young people, right? Religion is doing better than capitalism is. Yikes. Yikes. I would be very, very, very scared if I was seeing that kind of shit. If I was seeing that kind of shit, I'd be very, very scared. Yeah, everyone gets a plate before everyone gets seconds, but for housing. It's not difficult. It's not hard. It's like basic organization. Not surprisingly, here is my piece on our YouGov economist data showing a huge drop-off in support for Biden amongst young people. The decrease is really quite stunning. Minus 50 points on net approval since January 26th. Are we surprised? Who's surprised by this? I would love to meet the person who is actually surprised by this decline. Like, the Biden administration does what liberals do. Lie your face off, right? Tell the most egregious, duplicitous lies you can, and then betray everybody and don't follow through on any of it. And in Biden's case, some of it is quite shameful, in fact. Like, Biden can, by himself, as the president, he has the power and the authority to eliminate student loan debt in America. He could do it today. He could literally like write a one-pager and do it. And he won't. Because he doesn't care. He doesn't give a fuck. Like, he doesn't care about you. He doesn't give a shit about any of this. Right? Like, Biden's success as a president has been conning people into believing he's a kindly old gentleman. Like, this guy has stood in the House arguing to strip welfare payments from poor black people. Like, he's one of the darkest figures in American history. And yet we're all supposed to love him because, oh, America. I think America is the greatest thing ever in America. We should America because the United States of America, we're back. It's about unity and it's about being back and together. And together we're going to get unity in the United States of America. Back. Like, shut the fuck up. Hillary wants to run in 2024. Yeah, because that worked the first time. She's power mad, right? Like, she's power mad. Is all it is. Like, well, guys, we are reaching the end of this. I made it. I did it. Thanks so much for being here, guys. You guys are really the reason why this is a joy. I gotta tell you. Without you guys being here, I'm just a crazy guy sitting in a room talking to myself. It's nice to know that there are other people out in the world who want to push back in more serious and significant ways, who want to stand in solidarity. Please let people know I exist. Please tell your friends and family. I am growing. I'm steadily growing. We're going to hit that 1,000 mark. That'll probably happen by March, I think. If I wanted to be conservative. If I wanted to be a little hopeful, I would say maybe February, but I'm going to say March. Always remember, guys, each and every one of you is a quantum being, a divine being, standing around in divine energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to try to convince you that you are something other than what you are, which is their equal. Tell them to fuck off. Revolt, rebel, repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.